What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Slate here on the DraftKings YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter pages. Great to have you here with us for the Thursday sports edition. Although this is a funky one. This is a funky one with a funky bunch. All shouts to Mark Wahlberg. I'm Adam Kaufman. We got Matt Meiselman, Nick Friar. We're going to be heavy on basketball, but if you're watching along and you have any questions, thoughts, comments, constructive criticisms, I don't care, whatever it may be, shout us out. Just be appropriate. We are happy to help you out. And this show, it's going to be roughly as long as Aaron Rodgers' latest engagement. Boys, how are you?
Wow, that's one way to start a show. Jeez,
isn't it?
Shots early. All right, setting the tone. I like it. Okay, good.
Matt, good to see you.
You too. Yeah, happy to be here for a Thursday. It's just a weird day for all sorts of reasons. I'm never on Thursdays, and we've got the All-Star break coming up. I'm not really sure what I'm going to do for the next 6 or 7 days. I'm going to figure out how to kill some time because, this is it. This is our last shot before we get to the break, and then I don't know. Maybe everything will be the same when we get back, but maybe it won't be. Who knows?
Well, sadly, there's no football lineup building for you to consider, and there's obviously no baseball, even futures, really, that you probably want to think about because we don't really know the future of baseball at this moment with negotiations between owners and players. But hey, NHL over the next week. You can play a lot of NHL. You can play some golf. You can build your lineups that way. But it is, to your point, we got the All-Star break ahead of us, just a little light 5-game slate on the hardwood tonight. No better way than to think about basketball than to wish our good friend, our partner, Michael Jordan, by the way, a happy 59th birthday to his airness. Let's all watch Space Jam tonight and celebrate. Let's get into this one, though, because there are some key guys that are going to be out, injuries or whatever other reason, whole bunch of guys out with personal reasons. That's still a thing between Kyrie Irving and James Harden and Ben Simmons, and list goes on here. But Matt, let's start with you. Just kind of overarching thoughts on the slate before we go game by game.
Yeah, I think we have to jump to the stuff going on in the last game. So I'll try to keep this broad and then we can get more into it once we go specifically on each game. But to me, the most important decision point is how to handle Clippers Rockets, because we have a lot of guys who are underpriced on both teams. The Clippers are just giving their starters tons of minutes lately. So it's just making everyone look better than they were before. But there's also some injuries. Norman Powell's out right now, which does have a pretty big impact. And then on the Rockets side, we don't have Kevin Porter Jr., we don't have Eric Gordon. So there's more minutes to go around. And then this is also a game that we might have to think about blowout risk too, because the Rockets are 11-point underdogs. So to me, like all the main decision points are coming from this game specifically. And then, we can get into like Giannis versus Embiid versus Luka. Do you want to try to fit in 2 of those guys instead of just one of them, all of that? But ultimately, I think a lot of the biggest decisions are just coming from this late game, which is interesting for its own reasons because there's 2 hours between that last game and the game that precedes it. If we get any news in that in-between time, it could change a lot. So, I think just planning ahead for that game is really kind of like the overall thing that I'm looking at as the most important part of the slate.
Yeah, shoot, Friar, how are we going to do that, man? Because lineups lock, again, it's a light little 5-gamer. Lineups lock at 7 o'clock Eastern. It's less than 2 hours from now. The game that Matt's fixated on here, maybe a lot of people out there doesn't begin until 10:30. So if we're thinking, if you're making bets, that's a whole other thing. But if you're thinking DFS and building a lineup and, chasing big dollars, how are you reacting? How are you planning for that game when you've got to make your decisions well ahead of it?
Well, I think the biggest thing right now is Christian Wood, right? Because he's the guy who's not in the injury report, but we don't know necessarily what's going on with him. Kevin Porter Jr. is doubtful. And then Eric Gordon just got ruled out too. So there's still going to be value to be had, even if for some reason Kevin Porter Jr. does play or Christian Wood. I have a hard time imagining that both of those guys are going to go. Shorter was a guy who obviously went off the other day, played a lot of minutes. I think he's a guy who still brings some semblance of value coming into tonight. If you don't have Kevin Porter Jr. out there and it's just Christian Wood, I still like him a lot. And he's at, I think, 4.4K tonight. But the big thing is look, I understand you got to roll the dice sometimes, but when it comes to Christian Wood, even if he does play, you're going into the All-Star break. You've had issues with Christian Wood in terms of playing time and everything, and what's going on in Houston, and somewhat understandable on his end. This is a guy tonight who I don't want any part of. I'd completely fade him if I'm you guys trying to make your lineups and everything. I think there are better options. And looking at his price tag too at 8.1K, look, I know we're going to talk about the Heat at some point. I think Bam Adebayo is a guy. He's a little bit more expensive, but only like $300 DK more. I'd rather spend that money there on him, a guy who's going to be good if Butler's in, which he's expected to be, or if he's out, God forbid something happens. And then you look at the Clipper side of it. I do think that there, no matter what, there is some value to be had. Matt, I don't know if it was you that talked about Reggie Jackson on the Sweat today, but yeah, so you were talking about Reggie Jackson. I was talking about man. I think Zubac, either way, like there's some value to be had from him as well at their price tag. So I think that there's a safe way to navigate it. And I think no matter what, you should kind of just stay away from Wood tonight, because I just don't think the risk reward is there.
Diving into some of the numbers that I'm looking at here, guys that are projected for at least 40 points. And because it's a light slate, it's not a long list. You've got Joel Embiid, Luka Doncic, Giannis Antetokounmpo, and then it's another tier, obviously, with the likes of Jimmy Butler, if he plays, like you said, LaMelo Ball, Kyle Kuzma, who's been scorching hot, and Bam Adebayo, who, Nick, you were just talking about. But I think there's enough value on this slate that if you're building a lineup, obviously, you really got to choose. You don't have to do it this way. You could, really pay down in order to pay up and have a couple of true studs, but you're probably in most lineups going to have one of those big three between Giannis, Embiid, and Luka, and then one or two of those kind of middle tier guys that I just talked about, and then, maximize value around that. So, Matt, how are you choosing between Giannis, Embiid, Luka? Which one do you go with? Do you have a favorite?
I don't really have a favorite, but I think a lot of this comes down to what the rest of your lineup looks like. So I do think, what makes this interesting is Embiid and Giannis are playing against each other. So if you're going to play two of the studs, I think that pair makes sense because they're correlated. You could get overtime or something, like fitting them together could maximize some upside for that game. But Giannis is overpriced and the matchup's tough. So like the best appealing thing about Giannis is the ownership, which I think will be a lot lower than Embiid. It's going to depend, right? So like, there's no way I'm making a lineup tonight that has Giannis and Portis and one of Middleton Holiday to like go all in on Milwaukee, and it's basically a terrible matchup against the Sixers. Mm-hmm. But I almost think you want to have someone from this game. The other thing that's going on with the Bucks is that they have no depth right now. They traded Dante DiVincenzo. Pat Connaughton got injured. Grayson Allen, shorter term, but he's injured too. And now, like, we're seeing Serge Ibaka and Bobby Portis on the court at the same time because there aren't that many guards on this team. So, like, it's bigger lineups because they don't have the guard depth that they used to have. George Hill is still out of the lineup too. We're seeing Lindell Wigginton, who I had never heard of until 3 days ago, play significant minutes. I think Wesley Matthews is probably going to start in the backcourt, and then after that, like, I'm not really sure what we have. So, as far as choosing studs, I guess like Giannis is viable. Embiid plus Giannis might run you out of salary too quickly, but I also think it's viable. Maybe what I'm more interested is playing Embiid with just one of Middleton or Holiday or Portis, or maybe two of those guys to like mini game stack it. Basically what I'm looking for is if Embiid is the most popular pay up option, I want some other way to differentiate around him. One way to do that might just to fade the chalk in the late game, but another way to do it could be to play some mid-tier, like kind of higher priced Milwaukee guys like Holiday, Middleton, and Portis. And I guess you could do both at the same time, right? Like if you choose Drew Holiday, who's $800 more than Reggie Jackson in that same lineup, you just make that swap 1-for-1 basically. Like that's already going to be way different than the field. So that's the kind of thing I'm interested in. And then Luka, like I didn't even mention him there, but I guess like if you're not playing Giannis and Embiid, maybe you want to hope for a blowout there or something, then Luka makes a lot of sense.
What's your approach then, Nick?
Yeah, I think that Matt's onto something with the going with Middleton and then maybe Embiid on the other side. But the only thing is that Embiid is probably my third favorite guy of the three high price guys that we have tonight. Because when you look at I understand you can only read so much into historical matchups. You have different teammates and everything, but Embiid has not done really all that well against Giannis in the past. And look, he's done fine like relative to he's probably the best player on the court and everything like that for the Sixers. But in terms of paying living up to his price tag that he has tonight, he's not doing what you need from the DFS side of things. So I don't really like Embiid a whole heck of a lot. I'm not really too high on Luka tonight. So if you're going to go with one high price guy, above 10K, then Giannis is my guy for this one. Obviously he did well in his last time out, was it 50 points or whatever. But he's also had a little bit of rest too. I know that's part of the thing that we're concerned with going into this final day of the All-Star break. Our guys only going to play 20 minutes when they're normally playing 35 or whatever. But he did get rest earlier in the week. He didn't play before the Pacers game came out, and obviously made a big difference for him. So that's the guy who I'd rather go with. But Matt was on something where we're talking about these mid-tier guys. I do think that there are a lot of solid options here tonight. For value, whether you're looking from like the 9 to 8K range, or you go all the way down to 6. I think there are quite a few good players. We talked about a few of them from that late game. And even with the question marks going on with the Rockets right now, you can kind of safely navigate that game and still get some quality value, at least on the other side of the matchup, if not, going with Schroeder or someone else over on the Rocket side. So I think that normally, yes, I would consider doubling up with 2 stars. And we'll be better off doing it with Giannis and Embiid because they're in the same game, but not tonight, because I just like Embiid's one of those guys that I'm just not really feeling it.
So we're showing Joel Embiid numbers right now. And like I said, we'll go game by game. So we'll have time to get more into Philly. But I don't know, of the 3 of us, I'm probably the one who's more a victim to circumstance, to narratives, to that type of thing. I like taking that little stroll down narrative street. And I know James Harden's not out there, guys, obviously not yet, but I can't help but look at Joel Embiid, especially in a matchup like this where, personal pride has to come into play. Like, I know he doesn't care about fantasy numbers, and, we do. And over the last 7 games prior to this latest, 50-point loss to the Celtics, he had at least 59 fantasy points. But then he has this dud. He goes for 39 3/4, almost 40 points. His team, more importantly, loses by 48. Now he's got Giannis, obviously an MVP on the other side, a defending champ on the other side. You still would like to believe that the conference goes through your team. Both these guys have that sort of mindset. Again, it's the last opportunity to play for about a week at this point. I just think, to me, this sets up, again, narrative street here, Nick, but this game sets up for me as an Embiid, going off party. I don't think we're going to see a blowout. I think we're going to see really good numbers by both these guys. I'm looking for at least 60 fantasy points by Embiid tonight. I think he's going to blow up.
So I normally would agree with you on this, Adam, because I do think that there is something to be said about narrative and guys and how their approach and everything like that after, an upsetting loss or an upsetting performance. But I also think, when we talk about the sports book, that side of things, I don't necessarily think it's going to be a blowout, but I do like the Bucks against the spread tonight. They're at -6.5. But when you look at what's going on with Embiid, I understand that, maybe he's going to bounce back. I don't expect him to go, come up shy of 40 DK fantasy points. But I think when you look at his ceiling, one of the things that he's running into right now is he's got a team that you don't have a whole lot of shooters around him. You just traded away your best shooter. Mm-hmm. And then the guy you got for him, he's not there yet. He's not playing. Well, he's there physically, but he's not on the floor with you yet.
He's there on the bench watching.
Exactly. He's there spiritually with his cape and everything. So he's helping in some capacity, I'm sure. I don't know if he has any sage. Maybe he left that in Brooklyn. I'm not sure. I'm getting guys mixed up. But either way, I still so when it comes to narrative, I actually feel the opposite. I feel like this is a game where, again, we're talking about guys maybe take the night off, maybe get a little extra rest. I don't know if we're going to see him get 26 minutes like he did last time out, but I just don't look at this and think this is the a type of game where Embiid will bounce back. He definitely does that. Don't get me wrong. Normally, I'm very quick to back Embiid, even over Jokic at times, when you're looking at those 3 bigs going on a given night. But tonight, I'm not feeling that, especially because what he's done in games where he's played against Giannis, over the last 3 years, he's just not thrived in those situations.
Let's talk about Miami at Charlotte, because we got, 20, 25 minutes left in the show. We may as well start to go game by game and circle back to some of this stuff. We'll go on the Miami side first here, guys. And we're talking about the second best team in the Eastern Conference. A lot of points are expected tonight in this game against a Hornets team that has struggled, losses of 8 of 10. And we have questions about Miami right now. We know Tyler Hero is not going to play. He's the most important guy who's been ruled out, along with, Markieff Morris, Victor Oladipo hasn't played in a while, Dwayne Dedmon. But Jimmy Butler's a question, obviously. Caleb Martin, and then who cares about Udonis Haslem, all due respect. So you look at this this Miami team, and this is, I'm not saying stack the Heat necessarily, Matt, but you've got a lot of really good options. Like Max Strus without Hero is in a really good spot tonight. PJ Tucker, great spot tonight. Butler, obviously, if he plays, great spot. All the other guys that much better if Butler is ruled out, but hopefully he's not. You could make a case for Omer. You could, Duncan Robinson. I'm basically rattling off the roster. This is just, there are a lot of good options here for Miami.
Yeah, I agree. And I guess what has me a little worried is Caleb Martin, who I think will be back tonight. So if you had him out too, then guys like Strus and Robinson are much more reliable value plays. I think even with Tyler Hero out, part of what's happened too is he's missed games already. Guys are priced up. Butler has missed a couple games, not as recently, but about a week or so ago. Like these price tags, I think they would be too high if not for the good matchup. But because it's such a good matchup, that's why we can consider it, right? Like $8,400 for Bam Adebayo with Butler in the lineup. Generally, I don't really like that. I like it because they're playing Charlotte. I just think it's kind of already accounted for to some extent. At the same time, like this is a great matchup. So having someone from Miami, I think makes some sense. I don't really want to load up on them, kind of like what you were saying, but
yeah,
this is probably a team where you need a piece of it, most likely. Like a good lineup to me probably has one or two Miami players. But if you're going to play it, like you probably do want to look at the Charlotte side. I think LaMelo Ball and Miles Bridges are going to both fly pretty far under the radar because it kind of does set up for stars and scrubs to some extent. Maybe not a true stars and scrubs, but we have Embiid being the chalk. Maybe some people choose Luka instead. And then we have Reggie Jackson in the mid tier. And then you can just play cheap guys around that. Like, I think that's going to be the pretty common build. And then maybe most lineups play one of Bam or Butler. So going with someone else on Miami instead, I think is a good strategy. It's just, I'm not really sure who to pick here, right? Like it's a good matchup for everyone, but the prices are all kind of efficient. It's more just like who gets open for threes, who gets the hot hand, all of that kind of stuff. And we've seen this with the Heat too, where Spoelstra will not play Duncan Robinson, let's say down the stretch, if he's struggling from three and Max Strus is the one hitting his shots and vice versa. Like they'll just go with whoever looks better on a given night. And then we've even seen Gabe Vincent close over both of those guys. Yeah, it's kind of just uncertain. Obviously, Bam's a lot safer. Butler's a lot safer. I think those are really good cash options. But for tournaments, yeah, I might want to look to one of the more risky guys on this team and then also to Charlotte, where I just think the ownership is going to be a lot lower. Like Miami probably will be moderately owned, I would think. But just about everyone on Charlotte, I think, will be pretty contrarian. And then the last player to mention on Charlotte, too, I haven't mentioned yet, Montrezl Harrell. His minutes seem like they're starting to pick up. And this might just be someone who they wanted to ramp up and like get up to speed with the team and, you know, just figure out how he fits in. But maybe he's considered to be a better option for them than Mason Plumlee. And we see the minutes get into the 30s on a nightly basis. So if that's the case, Montrezl Harrell, he's down at 5,300. Like that's too cheap for him if he's going to play 30 plus minutes. So the minutes uncertainty is something to worry about, but I think the upside's there for him.
Nick, looking at some of these ownership projections, I see Butler right around 30% of lineups, Bam right around 23%, Lowry about 20%, everybody else less than that, as Matt alluded to, no one for Charlotte even close. I agree, Montrezl Harrell would be my favorite play on the Hornets side, though he's not a guy that I feel like I have to wedge into a lineup by any stretch, but I do feel like I want one of Butler or Bam, as Matt was just talking about. So Nick, which way are you going here?
Yeah, I'm gonna go with Bam in this situation. I think that he's done too well of late. He's been returning his value in 6 of his last 7 games. He's been returning value. So as much as if Butler's on the floor, that could cut into his ceiling. I still think that you're going to get a stable guy at 8.4K range. And I do think Matt covered it perfectly too when you're talking about the value guys over on the Heat. Montrezl Harrell on the Charlotte side of things is a great call too at 5.3K. With what he's as long as he's getting more minutes. He's going to be, even where his minutes have been at right now, he's still returning right around 5 times value at this price tag. So I wouldn't be too apprehensive about rostering him tonight. The other guy I like a lot too, who absolutely can fly under the radar. Matt's talking about LaMelo Ball. I think Terry Rozier is another guy who can fly under the radar. And if you're talking about, scrubs being out there and minutes being, taken away from some of the stars and whatever, as much as Rozier is one of their better players, this is a guy who, no matter what, if he's going to go out there and he's going to try and get his every single night. It's not a whole like an effort thing or whatever. He wants to get his scoring. And when Gordon Hayward's out, he's much more inclined to reach. His ceiling changes big time. And if you look at his shot attempts too, since Gordon Hayward has been out too, been a nice little bump over the last 5 games. I mean, 22 shots last game, 27 before that, right around 37 to 41 minutes in each of the last 5 games too, hucking up a ton of threes. 2 games ago, he shot 17 3-pointers alone. I don't think we're going to see something like that tonight, but But he's had some really strong performances lately, and that's a guy who I'd like to roll the dice on tonight. If I'm picking, one of the two guys in the 8K range for this one, I want to lean towards Bam, but when you talk about the ownership projections, Adam, it's a little bit like I kind of almost want to lean towards Terry Rozier because it's going to be a little bit contrarian and kind of differentiate yourself from the pack.
You talked about it. No Gordon Hayward, no Cody Martin, no Jalen McDaniels for Charlotte. Let's take a look at Washington and the Nets. Nets have won their last couple after obviously a lengthy skid. The Wizards just outside of that play-in tournament. The East sitting 11th in the conference, losers of 7 of 10 because of it. For Washington, we pretty much know what there is to know. Rui Hachimura could play. He's a game time decision, but no Kristaps Porzingis. We know that they're, the top tier, like Bradley Beal's out for the rest of the season. So it creates, again, a lot of value here with this team. It's sort of a lot like the way I was talking about Miami before, Matt, in terms of just number of different options you could go with this team. You've got like Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Kyle Kuzma. You get Kuzma, not as much so actually, but Denny, Corey Kispert, even Ish Smith. All these guys, really good justifiable spots at sub 5K. Do you have a favorite in terms of value? Is this, a game that you're interested in here?
Well, just quickly, Caleb Martin's out now. So
okay,
that's going to open up your Max Strus and your Duncan Robinson a little bit.
Yep.
Yeah, I actually thought, and it would be a long shot if this happens now, but I thought this morning that the Wizards would give some guys a night off. They played in Indiana last night, and Kuzma shot 9 of 27 from the field. He played 38 minutes. Raul Neto is not as young as some of their other players. KCP, like these are the veterans of the team. They're not old, but these are the veterans of the team. Mm-hmm. So I really thought like there was a good chance the Wizards would rest some guys, especially with Daniel Gafford now available, potentially Rui Hachimura coming back. Like they can afford to not play Kuzma. But we've now gotten 2 updates today from the Wizards, and they haven't mentioned anybody. So at this point, I think we would have heard by now if anyone was going to sit. But I do think it's still possible that we see reduced minutes maybe for some of these stars, and we just get a situation where like everyone on this team plays 24 minutes. So for that reason, I think you kind of just have to stay away. Like, sure, in a tournament, Corey Kispert could get hot from 3, or like Ish Smith could play himself into some extra minutes if he's good off the bench, that kind of thing. Like those are some long shot GPPs that I'm somewhat interested in. But for the most part, I'm probably staying away from the Wizards side. And then on the Nets, like there's so much upside I think for Patty Mills and Seth Curry and Cameron Thomas, who on any given night can just make their threes, and like that could just turn into a really big fantasy game, with the 3-point bonus and everything. One of those guys makes a couple threes above expectation from what we normally get from them, and it turns into a monster game. So I'm definitely interested in the Nets guards. I'm a little bit interested in Drummond. I'm probably staying away from the Wizards for the most part. And yeah, maybe like slim chance we find out right before the game Kuzma's not going to go or Neto's not going to go, something like that, and that changes things. But as of now, yeah, I can't really do much with this Wizards team.
So Nick, Matt just said it, there's obviously there are the options on Washington, but for Brooklyn, same story with no Simmons, no Durant, no Irving, no Joe Harris, obviously all the heads of the snake, which means your highest priced guy is sitting at 6K, and that's Andre Drummond. So Drummond's in a good spot. Seth Curry, real good spot. Patty Mills, Bruce Brown, James Johnson. If you really wanted to pay down 3,600, you have any favorites here?
Seth Curry is one who I like quite a bit here, but my favorite one tonight for sure is Andre Drummond at 6K. And it's the big reason being, I know he's gotten a few more minutes last time out, and he's getting a little bit of workload. And with him and Seth Curry, as much as we're going into the All-Star break and guys want to rest, they got a little bit of rest, over the trade deadline. These are guys who I don't expect necessarily for them to go play 35 minutes, but I'm not as worried about them seeing a decrease in the workload that they've gotten over the last couple games. And when it comes to Andre Drummond specifically, we saw what happened with him when he was in Philadelphia, what happened when Tobias Harris and Joel Embiid were not on the floor. When he is like, I don't want to say that he's the star on the floor, but when he's the best guy on the floor for his team, which in this situation, I know Cam Thomas does well, and Seth Curry obviously can light it up, and Patty Mills has his games, but I still feel like Andre Drummond is the guy who has the potential to do the most damage in this one. This is part of why, between Bam Adebayo and Andre Drummond, this is part of why too. I'm not like, I need to go with Embiid tonight necessarily, because
Mhm.
these guys all solely have center eligibility, so you can only roster 2 of them. And I like Giannis more than I do Joel Embiid in this situation. So I was like, okay, well, then I can stick him at power forward or forward, whatever you want to do. And then you have those other 2 guys to take care of things at center. You're hitting those different price ranges that you want to. And Drummond, I mean, we saw what he did last time out, right? Double, 19 rebounds. I love his points prop on DraftKings Sportsbook too. It was at 10.5. We have no reason to expect that it's going to go, that he's going to go in the wrong direction with the volume that he's getting. So yeah, I think this guy's an easy guy who's going to return value for you tonight at his price tag.
A lot of value, obviously. We're just sort of navigating some different things behind the scenes as well. And looking at, let's see, we'll go Dallas and the Pelicans, 2 teams that are, again, sort of heading in the opposite directions as well. Mavs have won 7 out of their last 10. Pelicans, similar to what we were just saying with the Wizards, they're sitting 11th in the Western Conference, just outside the play-in tournament. And for Dallas, I mean, it's pretty much, there's not a lot here, like Reggie Bullock, Trey Burke, game time decisions, Marquise Chris, Tim Hardaway, Theo Pinson is out. Not a lot of questions, really, in terms of impactful guys. For the Pelicans on the other side, same thing. Like Zion's not playing, big surprise. Larry Nance is not playing. So as we look at Dallas here, guys, first, it's not really like a couple of the other teams we were already talking about. There's not a ton here. Like Luka's not in the best spot. Matt, kind of touched on that earlier. Brunson, same story. Dorian Finney-Smith is appealing at 4,600 for sure. Dwight Powell at 3,700. So if you want to look at those 2 guys, not that you want to load up on all these centers that we've been talking about here, but Matt, what's the approach, if any, here to Dallas, or is this just a team you're more inclined to want to fade tonight?
Yeah, I think the if any is key there. If I'm playing Luka, I probably want to try to squeeze in a contrarian player on the other side of the game with McCollum or Ingram or Jonas Valanciunas. Like, the appeal to all of those guys is that they're not going to be popular. They're all overpriced. Like, Reggie Jackson's cheaper than all of them, who I think we should get to sooner rather than later, just because like the chalk. There's so much of the chalk that's in that one game. So I'll be quick with this one, but basically, yeah, if you're playing Luka, maybe sort of mini stack it with the other side and play someone on New Orleans. I think Dorian Finney-Smith gets a little bit more appealing if Reggie Bullock doesn't play, just like maybe another minute or 2 is part of a shortened rotation. Otherwise, yeah, it's basically just Luka. If you're not playing Luka, I think Brunson makes sense, but this is not a game I'm overall that interested in. It's probably just Doncic with one Pelicans player or just staying away from it entirely.
Yeah, Nick, on the other side, it's really just Devontae Graham is in a good spot at 4,500. I don't think any of it, McCollum, Ingram, Valanciunas, I don't feel compelled to pay up for any of them.
No, Valanciunas is a guy too who we've seen his price tag kind of go down a little bit for a while too. And you think him on the other side of things, you would think, okay, maybe the Mavericks are in a tougher spot in terms of their bigs, but then you kind of see what's going on. You take a quick look over on DraftKings, and then you see, oh wait, they're not that great against opposing bigs. Making Maxi Kleber a guy who I'm interested in at 4K. Obviously had a good game last time out, and we're talking about guys getting rest. A guy who kind of might be a little bit concerning with that, but I still think he's going to have to get his, not like Luka, where it's a completely different situation. And Matt, talked about Jalen Brunson a little bit too. That's a guy I actually like quite a bit tonight because he's been the model of consistency when it comes to the scoring department too. He's been anywhere from 19 to 22 points over his last 7 games or something to that effect. I know he had a good showing last time out, right around 40 DK fantasy points, but at 6.4K, I think this is another guy who's a good mid-tier range price player. And going up against a team that gives up a lot of gives up like 13th most 3-pointers, but they have like the 6th highest opponent 3-point percentage in the league. The Pelicans do. So I think he's in a good spot where he's also been taking more 3-pointers over the last like 5, 6, 7 games.
So let's we'll save the big game, obviously, but let's take a look at Philadelphia and Milwaukee here. And we touched on Joel Embiid a ton already, so we don't need to really continue down that road. But Tobias Harris, good spot tonight if you're not a believer in Embiid. Shake Milton, close to the minimum, $3,500. Nick, we'll stay with you. Anybody from this side specifically before Milwaukee that does intrigue you, knowing that James Harden is the only key absence tonight?
Yeah, Tyrese Maxey was the guy actually that I was interested in. This is kind of, narrative kind of stuff, moving away from the stats, where your James Harden is going to be coming back, at some point after the All-Star break. I don't know. We don't know how quickly that's going to be, but I would think it's going to be, he's going to want to get on the floor as soon as possible so we can play with guys that know how to win. Finally, right? Hey, you get a chance to play with guys that know how to win. It's a very unique experience, I'm sure, because, the Nets obviously don't have guys who know how to win. No rings over there on that roster. But anyways, I digress.
He didn't say guys who know how to win. He said guys who want to win. There's a difference.
I thought I said know how to win too. Either way, Tyrese Maxey, he had a good showing when they saw the Bucks way back. I think it was in November. So you can only read into that so much. And this is a guy who, when you're looking again at that mid-tier range, I think there's a lot of good options there tonight. This is a guy who I don't think minutes are going to be a problem for him tonight. And as much as he's been struggling a little bit lately, I think that plays into his ownership or projected ownership. I think that makes him a safer play if you're looking to differentiate yourself in the mid-range, whereas opposed to like Jalen Brunson could be a little more popular if you're not going for a guy like Luka.
I think for Milwaukee here in particular, Matt, obviously you can add anything you'd like on the Philly side. Giannis, unless you just believe that, again, he's going to be that narrative street, like he and Joel Embiid are going to go bucket for bucket tonight or something like that. Not necessarily the best spot for him. Again, it's sort of more pay down guys like Serge Ibaka and, Jordan Nwora and guys like that, maybe Bobby Portis to some degree, but doesn't seem like a game that you're necessarily paying up on the Milwaukee side.
Yeah. And I mentioned Middleton and Holiday before, like that's purely to be contrarian, right? Just to get away from some of the chalk and the mid kind of like mid to high range. It really is where I'm looking, because it's also paying down off of Butler and Bam. Like they're a little cheaper than that. So it's purely an ownership move. Like part of me wants to just look at this Bucks team and just smash the under on the game total, because and I probably I'm not going to be that confident in it because it's purely a hunch. Like we don't really have a ton of news here, but my hunch is that we're going to see the Bucks deploy these bigger than normal lineups where they have two of Giannis, Ibaka, Portis, and potentially even Greg Monroe on the court at the same time, because they're just missing so many guards. And Grayson Allen being out is going to slow the game down. Like he's a pretty good offensive player. And without him, like it's going to be just bigger players. And Jordan Nwora is not as good offensively as Grayson Allen. And then on the Phillies side, we don't have Seth Curry, which maybe is properly accounted for at this point. Maybe it's not. Like we're getting Danny Green and Matisse Thybulle both playing big minutes. So the Phillies are more of a defensive oriented team right now than they were before without Curry, at least until James Harden is playing. I could see this game becoming much slower than we expect. So for DFS, that maybe just makes me less interested than I otherwise would be. And for the game total, like 223 or so feels high, but yeah, I'm not going to like necessarily recommend betting that because I don't really have numbers to substantiate it. This is just my feel of the game, that we could see the teams play more bigs than what we usually see, just because that's the way the Bucks roster shapes up right now. But yeah, like this, if I had to pick anyone that I would call safe from this game, it's really just Embiid. Like I think the game probably stays close, and I think Embiid probably scores 50 plus fantasy points, but it would not shock me if Milwaukee wins this game like 100-90. And we just see no one get there and everyone's bad. And this is a game you just wanted to avoid. Like that would not be that surprising to me at all.
If anybody's joining us a little late, came in late on the Twitter side in particular, no worries. Full show is available for you on YouTube. So you can go over there, check things out long before lock and catch up. This next game, really, it's the game of the night as it relates to DFS and questions and things that you need to consider. We talked a lot about it off the top of the show. We'll talk more about it right now. And that is, of course, the Rockets and Clippers. That game is in LA. You got the Rockets who, like you would normally think, hey, blowout, worst team in the West. They're on a 6-game skid. But then again, the Clippers, without their studs, obviously have lost 7 of 10. We're expecting a lot of offense in this one, almost 230 points. Kevin Porter, Eric Gordon, they're not playing for Houston. On the LA side, again, it's no George, it's no Kawhi, it's no Norman Powell, new acquisition. So you've got a bunch of guys here that are, it's just there's value all over the place, especially sub 5K. Going on Houston side first here, Matt. I know you've been saving up a lot of thoughts for this game. Like Dennis Schroeder he projects to be the most popular player tonight in terms of roster ownership. He's going to be in damn near 50% of lineups as things stand right now, after going for 46 points last night. He was, happy to get an opportunity off after that opportunity with the Celtics there. Christian Wood, he's obviously a question, but after Schroeder, I mean, it's Jayshawn Tate, it's Jalen Green, Garrison Matthews, maybe Şengün, kind of same story. Guys who are sub 3,500. You could look at KJ Martin, Josh Christopher, David Nwaba's in a great spot. You really can't go wrong. It sort of becomes a question of how many Houston guys do I want in my lineup?
Yeah, well, first of all, I feel like Schroeder is the main place to start with. To me, this is some of the most fragile chalk that we've had in recent memory. Now, like full disclosure, I haven't played a ton of DFS slates recently, so maybe there's been other examples like this. I just haven't seen them, but
sure.
At least as far as I can remember, like we have a guy who has spent the majority of the year in and out of the lineup due to various ailments, and he played 38 minutes last night after basically not playing that amount of time the entire season. The Rockets are also fully in tank mode. Like there is just no reason that he needs to play that much. If you told me that Dennis Schroeder just played 24 minutes tonight for no reason other than they got younger guys, like Josh Christopher also played 24 to 30 minutes, and David Nwaba got some extra run, and Garrison Matthews, and like all these guys just played a little extra, I like that's not a surprising outcome whatsoever. So all of these Schroeder projections are based on an assumption that he plays into the mid 30s or maybe even the high 30s in minutes. And while that's definitely a possibility, and if you fade him and he does do that, like if you fade Schroeder and he's on the court for 33 or more minutes, you're done. Like if you don't have him, because he's too cheap at 4,400 that his production is going to be good enough. He's just like, he's too involved in the offense to be bad in that amount of playing time. But I think there's two things that could happen here. One is they just play him less because he's not one of the young guys on the team, and it's also a back-to-back and they're just worried about him, or they get blown out because the Clippers are 11-point favorites. Mm-hmm. And if the Clippers are up 20 after 3 quarters, like I don't think we see Schroeder play in the fourth. So for all those reasons, like this is a guy who, sure, he could be projected around 40 to 50%. I think he does wind up way higher than that just because of the because his minutes will be there basically no matter what. For Schroeder, I think there are just enough ways that I kind of just want to stay away from it.
And then flip-flopped, and then no, I ended up going in the wrong direction. But in this case, I do think that he's a guy you want to get exposure to if you're running multiple lineups. Matt made a great case for Terrence Mann. I know we're talking about Reggie Jackson, but Terrence Mann is a guy I mentioned earlier at 5.1K. This is a pace-up spot for the Clippers, almost to the Lakers. Oh, wow. Valuable if Kevin Porter Jr. is doubtful, ends up not playing. If Christian Wood
game, play almost everybody from this game and then, fit in Embiid or something like that around it and, see which way the night takes you. But on great spots. They're on great spots, Nick.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I'm saying like Şengün, like if Wood doesn't play on that side of it, I like him. But on the other, like that's all these ifs, ands, or buts. We're going to have to wait a while because it's a 10:30 game Eastern time. So it complicates things. I think you're just better off staying on the Clipper side of it. Reggie Jackson's not personally the one that I want to go with tonight. I do think he's a solid option, but I just think there are a lot of good players in that 6K range. I think the Clippers are a spot where you can get a ton of savings. Like we talked about with the Heat, with Martin now being out too. I think this game is going to be a good source of value. You can just stay in the Clipper side and you'll be fine with that.
What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, everything I said might indicate that I don't want to stack this game or I have no interest in it or something like that. I do think it's a viable strategy. I mean, maybe you stack it without Schroeder, or if you're going to play those two guys, you throw in what should be a very contrarian Christian Wood in there, who I think people are a little worried about, and rightfully so. But if this game is going to stay close, I think he probably is going to have to be pretty good in that game for that to happen. But if you're not playing some of the starting chalk, you can stack the blowout version of this game too, because it's not like you're just stacking garbage time players who aren't going to get the run unless it's a blowout. There are guys like Amir Coffey and Isaiah Hartenstein and Josh Christopher and Jalen Green, even, who I think, because the Rockets are a little thin, probably is still out there in the fourth, even if they're down a lot. Like the scenario where the Clippers are up 25 going into the fourth quarter, you probably already have 15 to 20, or if not more, minutes at that point out of those guys because they're all in the rotation. And then you might just get extra run out of, let's say, a Hartenstein or a Luke Kennard because those are the guys that are playing well. So I think it kind of just depends what the lineup is, right? Like if you're playing Jackson and you're playing Batum and you're playing Zubac, you probably want at least one of Schroeder or Wood or Green or Tate, someone like that in the lineup. But if you're not playing those guys and you're going with Coffee and Hartenstein, then maybe you fade Schroeder for that lineup and you go with Josh Christopher, who I think he's probably the largest beneficiary of a blowout where like he's going to be out there instead of someone like Garrison Matthews or Dennis Schroeder just to like get the experience as a younger player. So the other thing to end on here is that you can wait to see how your lineup is doing before you make this call. Like if you stack a bunch of Miami guys, that game's over by 9:30 and you've got until 10:30 to make your decision. There's a lot that you can wait for. And then you see like, okay, my lineup's in a really good spot. I'll just stick with the chalk because I'm already so far ahead. I can just play Schroeder and Jackson. On the other side of it, like if your lineup was a total bust going up to that point, you've got to make up the ground somehow. So maybe that's when you go with Christopher and Amir Coffey and maybe someone even more crazy than that.
Tell you, if you're doing a showdown for Houston and LA tonight starting at 10:30, good luck to you. You get some choices to make for your 6 spots. Captain Reggie Jackson, then figure it out from there, I guess. But all right, well, unfortunately, we're out of time, which is sad because we could keep going. We could be talking about whatever else and really dive deep into the sportsbook side. But you know, we have rules to follow, guys. We do. It means we can't stay. We have to go celebrate Michael Jordan's 59th birthday. So thanks to producer Eamon. Thanks to our technical director, JP, IttyCap, sliding on in, helping us out today. We always appreciate seeing you. And Friar, Meiselman, thank you for jumping in here on a Thursday sports edition for the Slate. I'm Adam Kaufman, back with you tomorrow as I don't know what we'll talk about, honestly. We leave that for tomorrow. Good luck with your lineups tonight. Have fun. And guys, thanks. Always a pleasure.